Baraza will be on blockchain startups, university collaboration and research. My name is John Wanaina Karanja. I'm the co-host of the Black Blockchain Summit and also the CEO and co-founder of Melanin Solar. So we're going to be using our three panelists, and I'll start with the lady, Deidre. You can give us a 2-minute background on what you do and where you're from.
Hello, my name is Deidre McIntyre. I'm actually founder of a group called Black People and Cryptocurrency. I'm happy to be at the 3rd Black Blockchain Summit. We've been here at this conference for each year. My background is actually as a journalist. I have a bachelor's degree in journalism from West Virginia University and a master's in education from Long Island University. I used to be a public high school teacher. So you're probably thinking, how did that land me in technology? Well, shortly after I graduated with my journalism degree, I landed a part-time job with a software development firm on Long Island, originally from New York. And I landed it because I could spell the. That was basically the gist of it. And they said, we'll tell you everything we need to do, but basically you'll are facilitating the software engineers and finding free software for them. And I was like, well, how do I do that? And they were like, well, we've got this online ramp called CompuServe. There's a back door. Spit a whole bunch of stuff about me about Archie and finding different data. But that was my plunge into the pre-web .com world, well, pre.com world actually. But once I got bit by that bug, it was always an undertone. So even when I was working in secular journalism, I had a technology column for everywhere that I wrote, in addition to writing for technical publications. Ended up taking some free HTML classes by, like, I think about 1995, 1996. And in 1997, I landed a full-time position with a .com in New York City. That was a precursor to Facebook called the Globe.com. So the Globe.com is noted for having the highest IPO first day gain at the time. And it's kind of infamous for its 2-member startups that the company kind of took a nosedive. But I was there for 2.5 years and was pretty much well-versed in the project management aspect of interactive social media before the term social media became popular. So after that 2.5 years, I was kind of burnt out from technology. I actually wanted to teach children, so I went back and got my master's degree, became a teaching fellow in New York City, and was studying for my master's and teaching Brooklyn kids in the school was Franklin K. Lane. Most people, if you've ever seen the movie Spider-Man Homecoming, you've seen the outside building of Franklin K. Lane. The outside scenes were filmed at the high school that I used to teach at. So after I taught for about 5 years, I kind of went back to my web development practice, which was mostly helping people of color with their websites and social media. And I kind of fell into the blockchain sector after a former .com client of mine, who was actually a VC, asked me to write a plain English document on Bitcoin that I had heard about in 2013, but completely didn't pay any attention to it. So I wrote that document in about September, October till November of 2016, and I said, wow, there's a whole different internet protocol happening and network happening here that I didn't know anything about. In 2017, I decided, after being solicited many times by different MLMs and different organizations to buy Bitcoin to these third parties that were willing to help me out for hundreds of dollars a month, I realized there was a need for a Black group on Facebook. At the time, there wasn't a public Black group focused on the sector at large, blockchain and cryptocurrency. So we named it Black People and Cryptocurrency. And then we set about the road of education in terms of how to understand the platform for people that don't have a technical background and were interested in actually starting launching their own wallets and different ways of buying Bitcoin. And then we have since segued now into continuing the education lines, but also in supporting the Black-led startups globally who are still either non-funded or underfunded.
Awesome. That's a great introduction. Professor Massey?
Hey, yeah, so my name's Bill Massey. I'm a professor at Princeton University, Department of Operations Research and Financial Engineering. And I should say up front, I don't really work in the blockchain area. My specialty is in a field called queuing theory. And currently, I've been looking at problems that have involved the efficient design of resource sharing services. Like, so for example, hospitals. You don't purchase a hospital bed. This is a resource you share. You keep it for the duration of your time there, but when you leave, someone else will use it. Okay. Also, another example, resource sharing services, smart cities, transportation issues, like bike sharing systems. And so these are areas where a lot of people in queuing theory are looking at ways of modeling these systems and helping out designing these more efficiently. But how did I get into resource sharing services? Well, before that, I used to work in communication services. Like, so for example, telephone call centers. So how many, there the resource might be telephone operators. How many do you need to hire to have an efficient communication service system when you have a 1-800 number help center sort of situation? Okay. Well, how did I get into that? Well, my interest in, I was exposed to call centers before I taught at Princeton. I was a member of technical staff at Bell Laboratories. And so getting into communication services was inspired by, prior to that, looking at communication systems. And guess what? So the field of queuing theory that I work in, it was originally invented to help with the design of the telephone network. And as an encore, it was found to be useful to help design the, well, first it was called ARPANET, later became the internet. So the whole idea is that when you had a phone system, you had a system that facilitated human beings communicating with each other. And so queuing theory came into existence around 1917. Well, about 50 years later, they said, well, why don't we develop a communication system for computers? And that first became the ARPANET, but now today you call that the internet. So that just gives you an idea of how mathematics can just play a role in a lot of these issues. And of course, things like blockchain are running over that communication, computer network. So I'll stop there.
All right, great stuff. Professor Sean?
Hello, I'm Todd Shern. I'm a professor of computer science at Howard University. My particular interest in blockchain is around the equitable distribution and empowerment possibility. There's been a lot of discussion about how blockchain can be used for empowerment, and certainly myself and others want to be a part of that. And so one of the things that I noted was the need to develop proof of work algorithms that could result in a more equitably distributed reward of either the coin or associated token. And so in that context, again, engaging with someone like Dr. Massey, who is Professor Massey, who is an applied mathematician or an OR engineer, but also with others. And one of the things that we wanted to get out of this panel was for people, particularly people in the blockchain space, to understand how they might be able to effectively work with universities and HBCUs in order to advance the industry, to advance their business, and to prepare some Black students for success in this space.
Awesome, awesome. So we're talking about enhancing this collaboration between startups and universities, and in particular the HBCUs and also universities here in Africa. So, Professor Shan, where do we need to begin? Because I've been working with you at the personal level on the protocol that we're building out that our startup is using. It's called the WIFE protocol, and we face challenges in that. In our case, we didn't have access to, experienced applied mathematicians like Professor Macy. So how can we build those bridges and then we can deep dive into the actual technology?
Okay, so what I did is I just kind of defined this premise of working with HBCUs. And so folks think that working with HBCUs is a great way for a startup to save money. And what they can do is they can get these students who can develop all this code and can test it out. And instead of these students receiving money, they can receive course credit. I mean, what's wrong with that idea? I mean, it's great, right? Not so much.
Yeah.
Okay, not so much, right? Because students, although they're students, they're not without a brain to use. So the first thing that happens is they think that they're going to be abused. They're trying to be used on the cheap. That's what it really comes down to. So it's important that there be some clear expectations, and students got to have some idea of what comes out after that. And so I just kind of put these notes out here, and the rest of you guys are kind of free to jump in. But these are the things that have been observed that prevent students from just jumping in to these projects that are being proposed by startups. It happens all the time. Students are approached at Howard by startup folks, and they're very apprehensive about participation. So just comments in general. Deidre, I know you know what Mousebelt is doing with the accelerator and startups. And so what has been the uptake of that, and just what has your experience been with students?
Yeah, I think that across the board, in terms of students from HBCUs or just Black students in general, we're just not there. There is a bit of a feeling that many Black students who do venture into the forums are a bit intimidated. I think we have to work on some social dynamics to kind of reverse some conditioning. It's not that those few, and I do mean there are few, it's not like every single white and Asian student is there or Latino student. I mean, Latinos are kind of students as well, but it's not that they're so knowledgeable that they're gung-ho, but they have a certain self-confidence of stating that they're ready when they're not, and that kind of learning as I go along is okay, and making mistakes is okay because I'm in the mix. I think that Mousebelt has been relying on our organization, Black People Encourage Learning, to bring more, especially HBCU students, into the foray of learning online, learning virtually, working with virtual teams, and taking some of the free classes they have to offer. But there are other Africans there as well that came kind of independent of me, and I see the same pattern of behavior, whether they're from Ghana or some other places. They kind of lay back into the cut, and they seem to be extremely intimidated. So, I almost say that this is a socialization issue. This is a conditioning issue, even though we're coming from different parts of the world, whether we're coming from the Caribbean, Africa, or the United States, that we have to fight this psychological belief that we're not quite ready, or we're not quite good enough, or I know I need to be 10 times better, but I don't even feel like I'm on par. That's psychological, and that's where I see what's happening, because I know that those students that are in there that are of especially Indian Asian background, there are quite a few in Mousebelt, and then also actually a number of white students from Ivy League. They really don't know what they're doing, but they're not afraid to be wrong and to talk it out amongst one another and get better and move into the space. So I think that it's something that really needs to be tackled head on. And for them to speak up, saying, you just explained to me, and I have no idea what you're talking about. What do you want me to do? Be that blunt, and that has to come from the students. Otherwise, the person doing the presentation is like, well, no one asked any questions, so I think they got it. And that's the teacher in me, honestly. The teacher in me knows when the room is quiet, that's a dangerous place to be in, because they probably don't know what's going on.
What about Black startups? When Black startups approach HBCUs or Mousebelt, what has been your experience with that?
A lot of the Black startup founders, many of them are not recent college graduates. They're older. They're in their late 30s, early 40s, early 50s. They've had more often than not, they've had career experience previously, working for some mainstream companies, including Apple and IBM, and being the lone Black person in that type of sector and competing. So they have not necessarily approached HBCUs directly. They, come to me, and they're willing to, if we have a clear-cut issue that we want students to work on, they're willing to hand it over. But a lot of times they don't go to Black students directly because they don't have any money to give to universities or students. So there's an intimidation, like, I'm bootstrapping myself. I put a double mortgage on my house. I don't have the wherewithal, the funding to say, like, because honestly at Mousebelt, a lot of their funding is coming from, to back up a bit, Mousebelt is the first United States-based accelerator of blockchain startups. They founded in 2018, so they're going into their third year. They have a number of educational alliance partners, which basically are all the startups within the blockchain space coming out of Silicon Valley, or pretty much all of them. And these startups are giving money to education, to help fund the education. But where do these startups get the money from? Well, these startups got the money because the alumni of Stanford and Berkeley and MIT dumped millions of dollars into the startups. Now, the Black startups, on the other hand, don't have any such funding. They're not getting funding from Black VCs. They're not getting funding from Black private equity. They're not getting funding from anyone. Everything is bootstrapped. So they cannot come into the party on par and say, look, I'm a startup. I've got, an extra million to play with. We can either split it between the university and some work study funding, but I need this project worked on. So that's the missing piece in the development in terms of the African American side of ensuring that we have startups that are competitive in the mainstream stage. There's no water, so to speak. There's no funding for that to happen. So you're not going to have the startup founders approaching HBCUs because they're going to say, look, all I can offer is sweat equity. That's all that I have because I've exhausted. And in turn, it puts Black founders in jeopardy because those who have developed MVPs, they've done so with Asian and Eastern Europeans primarily, because the Asians and Eastern Europeans have the ability to say, look, I got a paying job here, and I like your project. How much you going to give me in terms of an ownership stake, and I'll work on your development for free. So Black founders are keenly aware that they are putting themselves in jeopardy as a founder to be tossed later on because they didn't get equity from their own community.
Okay. Dr. Massey.
Yeah.
Question. Is there, just for instance, as an example, is there some mechanism for Black startups or Black entrepreneurs to engage Princeton in some way?
Well, I mean, those things are being developed, like right now as we speak, because there's been a lot of interest in exposing students at Princeton to entrepreneurs. And there have been some Black alums interacting with some Black students also. But since this is relatively recent development, so it's hard to say where it's going. One thing I would say about when you talk about student perspective, one thing that does go on at our school in general, like sort of the signature project at our school is the senior thesis. So every undergraduate spends their senior year working, the entire year, 2 semesters, on a focused project that, they'll write up as a thesis dissertation. And it's something where they they cannot get money for it. It's something they do for, it's two semesters worth of school credits. So that's something that goes on.
Yeah, so that's similar to, and that's similar to what we implemented last year. We had, and this is with YBIO, we had a student in our computer science senior project class who developed some underlying code. Now, one of the things that was notable about it is that he developed the code in Python, which was a language with which he was familiar, and he could develop the code relatively quickly. But the actual implementation of the algorithm and the code itself was done in C++, but the fact that there was working code in Python formed the basis. And so that's also kind of what could happen is that, and I'm really speaking to Black startups, they could approach the senior project instructors at HBCUs and at any institution to see if there was a match between some of the challenges that they may be facing and the skill sets that students might have to devote to that project over an academic year. And as Dr. Massey said, their payment isn't an issue in this regard because the process and the mechanism is already in place, but that directly addresses a couple of the bullet items, which is that these project timelines align with the semester and that there's some clear outcomes that also align with the class grading scheme.
Oh, Todd, I should mention one important dimension of a senior thesis, that after the student is at the end of it, the student writes up a thesis that is published at the university. So it's something it's a document that's available online from the school. So that might get into intellectual property issues. Because the student has to feel like they can work on something they can tell other people about after it's done.
No proprietary, no secret sauce, no Colonel Sanders secret recipe. It has to be fully disclosed. Well, this is blockchain, so we advertise transparency.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the student's perspective. The faculty's perspective has to be considered as well. They have to have a clear understanding of the academic value of what's being asked by the startup, and would there be some potential publications that could result from this work? And then if they're going to invest their time, is their results going to be IP in which they control, or they control it jointly with the startup? So those things certainly have to be defined in advance. And then furthermore, there has to be, and this is similar with the students, there has to be project timelines that are consistent with how faculty operate and their own schedule and their availability. So underlying all of this has to be, and this is from the perspective of the faculty, that this isn't going to be a one-off. There is some value in investing time in this thread that could provide some return for future research, collaborations, or competition or compensation. So let's just kind of open up and get some thoughts around that. Professor Massey, this time.
Oh, well, one thing just occurred to me that from the company's perspective, okay, let's just say, for sake of argument, the senior thesis is due like April 15th, right? And so if you want that student involved to keep working on that project after April 15th, you better be informing him that either there's a summer job or a full-time job waiting for him, starting that summer. Okay, so that's when you would have to hire the person, or maybe you had him working the summer before just to get him, primed to jump into the project. So that's the only way you can really extend the relationship. The only other way is to have someone in the company who's helping out the student and shadowing what the student does, with the understanding that this person takes over whatever the student did after April 15th.
Deidre.
I think in an ideal world, in perfectly neat world, that would work. But in reality, to give you an idea of what's happening in the blockchain space, at least from the mainstream perspective, the projects are just not that neat and not that succinct. For instance, there's a startup called, probably the most funded startup, or one of the most funded startups in blockchain, is a venture called Filecoin that is basically incubated by Stanford, initially funded by, I guess, Stanford and private equity tied to Stanford. And then during the ICO boom, were able to raise most of their millions. They have 257 million for just that one particular project that was founded probably around 2014, 2015. They have yet to launch. As a matter of fact, this past August, they were supposed to launch some component. I was trying to look it up just right now. They may have launched a partial launch, but that's how long of a window you're talking about. And it's important to note that Filecoin is a copy, basically, of a Black startup with Sean Wilkinson out of Morehouse. I think he's originally from the West Coast, but he graduated from Morehouse. Storage was his decentralized storage provider, was the first actual property of its kind in blockchain. And they were working with, continue working with 33 million, and most of that 33 million didn't come from us. So that leaves, basically Sean, who I don't know and I've not talked to, but I've worked at a number of corporations to know, in corporate America as well as startups, to know that, if you're not getting the cheese from your own community, you're basically trying to fight to stay in your own startup. And that goes for anybody. It goes between the white guys too. You come to the table and you're kind of a white guy out of the Ivy League group, you're gonna have to fight to stay in your own startup if that Ivy League money comes in there and they want to replace you. So I don't think things are so neat and so precise that we can honestly and be honest and say to a student that, within this semester, this is what's going to be finalized, and by the time the end of the school year, and we have a job waiting for you. That's just not realistic. It's not actually happening now with the most funded startups that are in the space. So I think we need to be honest about setting some, micro objectives, and this is where we want to be at this time, and meeting objectives, and then realizing that the state of, technology, blockchain development is not so neat. The platforms that we have to work with are still in its infancy. We're really talking about, the early days of the .com at this point. We don't even know who's going to last. We just know who's funded very well. And it's always the same type of companies that are coming out of Stanford, Berkeley, and MIT for the most part, that are very cash rich. And they're not on this type of time schedule with their own projects. They're developing, they're marketing, they're speaking all over the place in every single conference, but in terms of actually deploying something that's working, they're not that deep. So I think we have to realistically look and say, what are we going to borrow from Silicon Valley and what are we going to toss out? Because we don't have as much time to waste. We certainly don't have the funding. But you have to at least let faculty and students both know that it's not that neat. We're not Panasonic. We're not IBM. This is a whole different wing of startups that people are learning by doing. You have to be realistic, and you have to celebrate the small victories that you have and be able to leverage that. And I wanted to bring about was something that Professor Massey said, that you know, Mount Spell actually encourages students to. They started a series of conferences called Reimagine. The first Reimagine series is in May. The second one was this past August, and they're preparing for September. They're actually encouraging students to come to the table and talk about what they're working on in a conference type thing. And the billing of the conference is not just students, but also the heads of so the kids have bragging rights. They can say, I was on a panel with Vitalik Buterin in the 2020 August conference or whatever. You know, but basically they're just saying, what are you working on? What are you doing? What did you learn? Because it's an informal way of education. Somebody is going to stumble upon the video at some point and see a name, see a black face or, you know, white face or Asian face, and know that this person is trying to work within this paradigm. So there are speaking opportunities. I know I've been asked by a Tastemakers Africa to speak for them, and moving forward, that's going to happen more often where I can recommend people to come speak at a very non-technical crowd. So we like to see more diversity and more faculty as well as students, not just everyone hearing from me all the time, but we like to say, you know, Professor Shern, this is Professor Massey, this is what they're working on, this is what they're doing in the blockchain space, so that people can see that we're actually working in this paradigm.
Yeah, I think just to add a bit, in our case, what we did is we leveraged open source. So we took the Bitcoin source code and forked it as the MIT license, which is a license that allows you to use intellectual property as long as you acknowledge the previous set of developers. And that really allowed us to skip the need of huge amounts of funding for research and development and just leverage a tool that's already working. And then we went to Professor Shan at Harvard, and he's able to connect us to a student that he mentioned earlier that was able to develop the algorithm in Python, which Tim later took and converted into C++. Of course, the thing that we're missing that we alluded to earlier is actually building the mathematical components from ground up. Professor Massey mentioned he's done a lot of work with queuing theory. Blockchain uses queuing theory, so we would have certainly benefited from his insight in terms of improving the algorithm that is already deployed. So there are certain trade-offs that exist because of having to go to this model that are able to move quickly and cheaply, but we also don't have the benefit of accessing to universities like Princeton, where you find these origins of applied mathematical theories and so on. So for me, looking at this collaboration, I think what's missing other than the socialization of Black students to become innovators is also access to sort of, if I can call it the Ivy League database of information and research that already exists. So I think that's something that maybe I can ask Professor Massey how we can also, just on that precisely engage with him and university such as Princeton.
Well, things are literally changing as we're speaking. Because, for example, 7 months ago, I had never taught a course on Zoom. And so this technology is gonna be a game changer. I don't think we yet understand all the things you can do. For example, I was talking to some Black students at Princeton a couple months ago, and I told them that I gave them some numbers like if you divide 6,000 by 400, you get 15. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Okay. Well, 6,000 is probably a good upper bound on the number of Black alums of Princeton University. 400 is about the number of current Black students. So if I told them, if each one of you just contacted a Black alum by Zoom and then record the conversation, just do that one alum once a week. Well, by the time the school year is over, you could have a complete oral history of every Black person who ever went to Princeton University. And it's free. Okay, but before Zoom technology, it's not clear how you could have done that. Okay, so I think so it is possible to communicate with people literally all around the world, with Zoom in a way you could not have imagined, just, 7 months ago.
Yeah, definitely. I think it has also allowed us to connect. This would not have been easy without Zoom, so that is very, very true. I think for Deidre, Deidre has actually been helping us on our project, highlighting it in terms of the spaces that she's on, and really trying to get people interested now as contributors. So you talked about, an alumni of 400 Black students from Princeton. Some of them could be engineers. Deidre, how would you say we can leverage this sort of pool of alumni of Black talent? Because some of the most talented African people would be African Americans, just because of the access you have to institutions in America. So how can we bring all of this together? With work that you've been, helping projects like ours, gain traction.
I mean, we really need to fund the education, and we've fallen behind. I think part of my background is also ancient African history. So people find my name, they're either going to find it related to cryptocurrency or they're going to find it related to Kemet. Those two worlds of mine kind of remain separate. Water. We need to water our education in blockchain. Right now, Mousefeldt is we're an ambassador of Mousefeldt because they're funded. They have more than $40 million and they give $2.5 million away to students in micropayments to help them fund events. Right now, we're pushing a lot of HBCU students to Mousefeldt, and the reason why we're pushing them to Mousefeldt is because the education is already built out on their website and they're offering it for free. But there's nothing that they're doing that we couldn't do with Black people in cryptocurrency or as an addendum to what they were already doing, especially in support of Wide Protocol and other startups, and get people educated. So we need the alumni of all the universities, the Black alumni, the predominantly white institutions, the white HBCUs, to start and get the fundraising together. And sometimes it's a lot of things is like who you know. I mean, we have a startup, one of the first Black startup founders in the NFT space. If you're not familiar with NFTs, the acronym stands for non-fungible tokens, but what it means is digital collectibles. So think about it as trading cards, stamps, collectibles, that sort of thing, but now in the digital world. So, one of the pioneers in that space happens to be a Black woman who she can't get a meeting anywhere. She's the first person to offer an NFT, a non-fungible token that is a digital sneaker, a trading sneaker that predominantly white males in the space are buying and exchanging and trading, and it makes her money doing it. Meanwhile, she's basically getting knocked off by Nike and by NBA because she sent her pitch decks to all the right VCs that aren't us, and then those VCs went dark on her, stopped talking to her, and next thing you know, you have Nike making an announcement that they've gotten a patent on NFTs and sneakers. Well, she's the first person to have a working product in the area. So Black startup founders are suffering from being invisible, and we're also suffering because we're losing the war on their education. So if alumni get together across the board and figure out, let's build this out, let's fund it, and let's start educating our people on the technology and all of the different projects that are available, I think we can get back into the game. We're not that far gone. Accelerators have been in the United States only since 2018, but they're funding their initiatives. They're funding their education. They're throwing money left and right. And I understand that, Professor Shern, has a demonstration about credit. That's all well and good. But if I'm a Black student at a predominantly white institution or at an HBCU, and I have limited scholarship, I have limited funds, I'm going to go to Panasonic. I'm going to go to IBM. I'm going to go even to Ripple in our space because they're giving me money. No offense to Wide Protocols, no offense to Black people in cryptocurrencies, no offense to anyone else that's in the space, a startup founder, but I'm not going to spend what little time I have between classes and maybe a part-time job and do something for free because there's no promise or there's no future there. If I work for Panasonic, if I work for IBM, or if I work for any of the corporations that are coming in throwing money at me, I might land a job there. So that's how we end up losing our best and brightest to quote unquote the mainstream, who in the long run don't do them a bit of good. Because in the long run, you have the same complaints that have been going on for almost 50 years of people being isolated. I know because I was a lone duck, so to speak, at a .com. I couldn't pull anybody in, no matter, and I was a production manager. So, and repeatedly, you have the millennials now that are starting at different places like Microsoft and stuff like that. Once things get going real good, and they try to pull in people that they know, they don't even get past HR in terms of diversifying the company. So, in order for us to be competitive, we really need to put
I would give a quote from, Ted Turner. He once said, try to make all your mistakes with other people's money. And so, there's something to be said for, working for Google now and getting ideas to implement to some startup you develop later. Deidre,
I would talk about that. I think there's something to be said for that, but to give some perspective to my background, I worked in corporate America with the AIG, corporate insurer with the Mutual of US, and other insurer. I worked with Start.com. I was a 12-year hire of Google.com, which is a precursor to Facebook Marketing. And the Black Planet became this war. And I watched when I was at the startup, I was one of the other people I wish I had to actually go back to Cornell and graduate. And so the 12 I still mentioned there were at least 250 people in 3 different companies. And the headquarters was based in New York City before I got set up and left. And to say that they were working off other people's money. When they hired me, they had $6 million in full dental and full health. And yet they hadn't graduated from Cornell and they really didn't know what they were doing. So to suggest that the only learning that can be done is to have first worked for a Google or Microsoft is kind of untrue. To this day, the 2 founders that I'm talking about, they just went off and started separate companies. I mean, it's almost like I said to one of my friends one time, I said, just once or twice or 3 times, I would love to live white boy free. They get to make mistakes while they leave the company. That's living white boy free. And in order to be competitive, we have to tap people within our community that are willing to take that chance. Now, does that mean you just do everything your own way and you don't have, boards of advisors and you don't, because they have to report to boards of advisors and stuff of mistakes that we as employees thought were outright foolish, but, people gave them the cheese, they had to bend to what they wanted as well. But, you have to be able to know that you can lead and know that you have the wherewithal to make mistakes. Mark Zuckerberg has made plenty of mistakes, but no one basically says the mistakes that he made has anything to do with his background or his inexperience. And in reality, it probably does have to do with his inexperience. He had the other job. He was straight into leading but they're encouraged to do that. And we've got to have that. We have to have that within our own community. We have to know that it is in our bloodline. We have to know that the oldest universities and schools on this planet are from the African continent, and that nobody taught the kings and queens of Kush or Kemet. No one foreigner taught them how to lead. They learned from the grass up, or trial and error, making mistakes, that sort of thing. What can we do better? Learn from the history of the previous rulers and leaders. Some did very well, and some completely messed up. But it wasn't because they were Black, whether they messed up or they did well. So we're going to have that in that community. We're going to have startups that start up and fail. 9 out of 10 white startups fail, and they're led by white men. So we can't expect a different. As soon as something fails and doesn't work well within the Black community, we can't throw it in the towel. But we have to encourage and have a supporting network. And from my background as an educator, as a secondary school educator, I always term in terms of scaffolding. You have to support. You have to support. This is where you're weak. I know somebody. There's somebody in my road. Call this person. You need to fill this hole in before you get in trouble with taxes. Or call this person. You have to scaffold and support and push, because we don't want the dynamic to appear that Black people are nowhere on the global scale. Not on the African continent. Not in the Caribbean. Not in the United States. And right now we're practically nowhere. And we shouldn't be. We've had people within this section since 2009. Can name people from 2009 when Rockland started. There were Black people that were in here, and they stayed here, whereas other people came in later have shot up there. And we can't. That's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. The values. If our startup founders are devalued, then no one takes us seriously.
All right. So I think we are almost out of time. So I would like us to make our closing remarks, and I'll begin with you, Deidra. Just some short closing remarks.
You can find me online. I'm on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn handle is my first name, Deidra. Shows how long I've been on LinkedIn. You can connect with me there. As I said, we're looking for funding for not only for ourselves, but for many of the startup founders within our network. Our focus is mainly just to support systems to the startup founders, especially in terms of education. We feel we have the wherewithal and the connections with being connected to John and Professor Shern, and hopefully in the future Professor Massey, to be able to support education-wise those engineers as well as lay people who want to enter into the business side of the field. So, feel free to reach out to me, and if you have any questions, and also the group Black People in Cryptocurrency is on Facebook. So for whatever LinkedIn blocks there are, I'm going to min there. You can send me a message there as well.
All right, thank you. Professor Massey, thank you for your participation. Any parting shots that you may give us?
Oh, I should also tell you that aside from what I've been doing in my career, another thing, you'll see this thing in the background called CARMS. That stands for Conference for African American Research in Mathematical Sciences. Something I actually started, I guess at Bell Laboratories, and then been running it for like 25 years, where it's been sort of a showcase of Black researchers in the mathematical sciences talking about their work. And we've also given opportunities for Black students, primarily grad students, but undergrads and grad students, to do poster presentations about their work in the mathematical sciences. I think about 150 of them have gone on to get PhDs in the mathematical sciences. And so things I usually tell them at the end is about how to, think outside the hypercube. That's one of my taglines. Be creative. Also look beyond the silos. It's easy to get into ruts, and it's every type of rut, because if there's anything I saw at Bell Laboratories, I saw how looking at, I saw Indian researchers talk to Indian entrepreneurs, talk to Indian VCs. And I have yet to see that type of exchange of information among Black researchers, Black entrepreneurs, and Black VCs. And so we have to learn, develop a common language where we can talk to each other and exchange ideas.
Excellent. Professor Sean?
Oh, Todd, didn't hear you.
You
I want to thank
Okay.
everyone for participating. I have a question though. I know this is supposed to be my wrap, so I'm going to save a little of my closing comments and put it to a question to Dr. Massey. I know Princeton hosted CARMS in the past.
Yeah.
Would there be a possibility that something like the Black Blockchain Summit could be hosted at Princeton?
Well, okay.
I mean, post-pandemic. Okay.
Well, exactly. The pandemic stuff, because people keep asking me, I did CARMS 25 years, but not this summer because of the pandemic. It's easy to say it's not now possible because if any conferences are going on now, they're going to have to be online. So a Zoom virtual conference. So for example, CARMS is going to happen next summer, but we're going to plan it as a Zoom conference because there's no telling when there's going to be a vaccine or how soon people will take the vaccine. So,
And I just want to
we
say,
could always do. Oh, well, one thing I should mention that, and we've done within the CARMS conference. Last time we had like a little mini workshop on data science. There are things going on, blockchain where we could have people talk about the mathematical sides of it and how to get more people engaged in it. So there, some form or some dry run of that could be done in the next CARMS.
and I just wanted to say that I wanted to congratulate Professor Massey because he neglected to mention, which I had read, earlier in the summer, that he mentored for instance, first African American valedictorian, and he's spoken of highly in the article. I remember reading the article, I think in the beginning, sometime in June or something like that, that Princeton has first African American valedictorian in history, and that Professor Massey was named by that student as being a mentor to him.
Well, I should mention yes, he is African American, but American as in being Canadian. And
Oh no, black student,
yeah.
black student.
But he made a Farrell video, so he's in there. And also you would have met him at the last CARMS conference. He he was one of the many students doing poster presentations.
It's long overdue, and in my country of New Jersey, in Rutgers University, we have our first, even as a rival to my undergraduate school, West Virginia University, we have our first school president, Holloway, I think is his last name. So we're making some progress in the education world, and we just need to follow up in the blockchain world.
So that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for having me here, Todd.